Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm, where we read to learn, but we share with love in order to understand and hopefully be transformed in our lives. Very happy to have with me today two authors, author Paul List and Ali Ghaffari. Hey, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Welcome, Paul and Ali. We're here to discuss their very interesting book, especially if you're a Tolkien fan. It's called Mount Doom, The Prophecy of Tolkien Revealed. And it's got a really cool cover, guys.
Thank you.
Very exciting book. So we're going to talk about orcs and hobbits and wizards and Tolkien himself. And it's a very fascinating book, and I think it's going to be well received. Paul, do you want to start us off with a prayer?
Absolutely. In the name Patri, Filii, Spiritus Sancti, Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In the name Patri, Filii, Spiritus Sancti.
Almost sounded like hobbitese.
Or elfish.
Elfish.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. So, you guys want to start off by just telling us a little bit about yourselves for our listeners today who are not familiar with you?
I'll start. I'm self-educated, self-employed. Pretty much, that's pretty much it for me.
Self-employed as writing author?
No. I'm a contractor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I hail from the great state of Vermont and raised by very young parents at the time. And fast forward, I was not raised Catholic. Came into the church as a result of Paul's influence when I was in college. Before then, I was initially raised Methodist, but kind of fell into atheism through he talked about being self-educated. He had been reading Aquinas and Aristotle for several years before we interacted in this way. In fact, he was my first employer too. I worked for him. He had a pressure washing business, and that was my very first job, was working for Paul. And we were neighbors for a time as well. And then I went away for a couple of years of high school and private school in Massachusetts, and then to college. And then coming out of college, I joined the Navy. And there was where the time and investment that Paul made into me flourished into coming into the Catholic Church. So I set off on a career in the Navy, flying F-18s. Met my amazing wife shortly after joining the Navy, and then we had three children, 3 daughters. And then spent time flying, was all over the world. It was an admiral's aide, instructor pilot, and then ended up at the Naval Academy teaching leadership and ethics there.
Wow.
And then when I was wrapping up my time in the Navy, we founded a Catholic classical school called Divine Mercy Academy in Pasadena, Maryland. And that's become my passion, is Catholic education, the renewal of Catholic education. And that plays a part in the book here, and we'll talk about that, and the role of education in formation. And so I devote my time is almost exclusively devoted to the renewal of Catholic education. And I also work for the Knights of Columbus now, doing leadership work for them.
That's exciting.
Well. Yeah. And then the most important thing I didn't mention was that I spent 4 or 6 years at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and I got my master's in philosophy and the master's in theology there, and I'm very grateful for that formation that I received.
Nice. You're from Holy Apostles. I taught at Holy Apostles for 6 years.
Did you really? Yeah. What a wonderful school.
From 2014 to 2020.
Okay.
And I left at the pandemic hit and everything changed. But I also got my master's in moral theology while I was teaching.
Yes.
Which was fun because I got it for free because I was teaching.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that was a great experience.
That was really cool. Yeah. Paul, are you a cradle Catholic?
I am, and I just wanted to say that's a perfect example of why I keep my biography on a down low, because I don't want it to be held up to Ali. Because Ali's the material doer. We actually make a really good team. And by God's grace, I'm a thinker and a dreamer, and I keep these big ideas in my head, and then I typically just forget about them and move on to something else, to entertain my imagination. And God put us together, and Elias can get anything done. And he was really the material. He brought this book into a reality in the material realm. Otherwise, it would have just been lost in my head, and it would have never got anywhere.
So the way it happened, Kiki, was so Paul would keep calling me and say, "Hey, I've got these ideas about Tolkien. Let's talk about these things." And he would asked me, say, we really need to write a book about this. And I just put him off year after year and said, I'm too busy. I'm raising young children. I've got my Navy career. And then as we were getting ready to transition to Annapolis, I said, okay, finally, but I need one more thing. I need you to come out. I need you to help me with my fence. So I got him. I got some work out of him. He flew out. He helped me with my fence. And then we just sat down and just started thinking through the book. And it took about 7 years for us to really get through what you have in your hand today. It was a lot of
hell of a fence.
Yeah, it was intensive weekends. So it would really just be Paul. He had had years and years of just emails where he's just going from one thought, one idea to the next, one concept, and trying to parse through those. And because a lot of it was intermingled and integrated and together, and then there was as his thought became more precise, and he started to realize some of these concepts were related. Then it was the work of kind of teasing these things out and then figuring out how they connected from one to the other, and then making it understandable. And Paul he's a contractor, but he is a very high intellect. His intellectual horsepower is off the charts. And so when he communicates, he speaks like Augustine writes, right? And he thinks like Aquinas or Aristotle. And so for the average person on the street, it's difficult to follow and to carry on because he's so well read. And so my job was to capture all of his ideas, to integrate them, to lay them out in a comprehensible manner, and then make it accessible to the average person walking along the street. So.
Well, one of the things I found fascinating right off the bat was when you compared the Summa, the Divine Comedy, and Tolkien's trilogy of the Rings. And that was exciting immediately because, well, my husband and I have run a Summa Theologica wrestling group, we call it, in Providence, Rhode Island for 27, I think it's 27, or maybe it's 28 years this year. And we've made our way all the way through the Summa. When we started, we thought we meet and have met once a month. And so when we got started, we thought we'd meet for 2 or 3 years and do the Summa. And we're just finishing up the compendium now in 28 years.
That's amazing.
But it's been quite an exciting journey. We've had a core group of maybe 4 people that have carried through those years, but we've had people come and go for various bits of time and have left for various reasons. And so the Summa's part of our background, my husband and myself. So it was very interesting to, have say the Summa, and then the Divine Comedy puts it into poetry, and then Tolkien puts the Summa into an epic story. Like, talk a little bit about that, Paul, because that's like.
Well, it's really, I don't want people to get the impression that it's kind of I'll say the word, an allegory for the Summa, because it's really not. But the Summa plays a heavy hand in the mythology, but it's directly opposed to the Enlightenment thinkers, particularly Descartes. And so there's several contests going on in the Tolkien's mythology. First off, I'd like to just say that Tolkien's mythology is not about this world. The world that Tolkien created is actually a single human being with it's a substantial unity of the person. And this person's named Arda, and it represents all of Christendom throughout its history, its present, and its future that Tolkien saw coming, which includes transhumanism and AI, and the dangers of the digital realm, the virtual realm. So we've got the heavily influenced scholastic philosophy against the Enlightenment innovators, I think it's really Tolkien's mythology, I believe, is largely a response to Leo XIII's Aeterni Patris, his famous, wonderful encyclical, where he calls the West back to the sanity of Aquinas and pleads with the Western world to abandon the innovations and the suicidal ideas that were born of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. And we see the issue now. So we see it all panning out. The age of the machine comes to its apex with this idol that we're making in our own image to worship. It's going to bring us down.
This war of ideas within the soul between beauty and music and ugliness and the machine. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I've always loved, I haven't read The Lord of the Rings. It's been a long time now. I think it was about 40 years ago, but of course it stays with you. And now I'm tempted to go back and reread it. But one of the things I always loved was the clear delineation between good and evil, even though evil can be used for good, in the sense of like Gollum. In the end, he gets used for and doesn't plan on it, but God uses even him for evil. And one of my favorite lines in The Lord of the Rings has always been that moment where, they kind of want to kill Gollum off. And I think it's, the wizard Gandalf says, he may still have a part to play. So just, just let him be for now, sort of let the wheat and the tares grow together and see what happens. But I've always loved the clear delineation of good and evil, and it was one of the things when I started and did not finish reading. What's the Kid Wizard, the one that came out 20 years ago?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter, thank you. One of the things I didn't like immediately about Harry Potter was that there wasn't this clear delineation of good and evil. It was just kind of a big mess.
Right.
Speak. And so I didn't, encourage my kids to go in that direction.
Good.
But yeah, exactly. But yeah, it is a war of ideas, and you see it so clearly both in our society, well, probably since Adam and Eve, but in our society certainly today. With I was just talking to someone recently about our architecture and how we've gone for this. What is it called? Brutalist architecture.
Oh yeah.
Just like, and when I was in Venice in 2005, I remember there was a big sign outside one of the art museums that said, "It doesn't have to be ugly to be art," because they were already starting to battle this ugliness, ugly as art. And in our town here, about 10 years ago, they redid the McDonald's, and it used to be yellow and red and kind of stupid but silly and fun, and they repainted it gray. And when I first saw it, I thought it looks like a prison building. And slowly all of our architecture has turned into this brutalist ugliness, ugly as sin, as one of the books called it. And so we are seeing it. We're seeing it in the culture, in our comedy. We see it in our films. We see it in our architecture. We certainly see it in our music. Good God. So yeah, it's interesting.
I point that out in the book. I take an opportunity to poke at the atonal avant-garde, which is really kind of the apex of refusing to transcend, absolutely deliberately refusing to transcend. And if art doesn't transcend and rise above the material realm and try to rise up and meet the eternal, then it has no beauty. Right. It can't have beauty. It can only be utilitarian, and we've really lost ourselves in a utilitarian realm where art, quote unquote, is. We've got this false notion that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that makes all beauty just a subjective mess. And real beauty transcends, and it's objective. But it has to include God. It has to be speaking to God, trying to touch God, like the finger of Adam coming up to try to touch. That's art.
Right. Yeah. When we're really sub-creating with God. Pointing towards him, pointing towards the beauty of creation, the beauty of the human person. Yeah, that idea, I'm trying to remember where that came from, but the idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, it's like, good God. No.
It came out of the Enlightenment.
Yeah,
I'm sure. It came out of the Enlightenment. I can't remember which innovator said it, but do you want to get into some of the ideas and some of the characters? I'm sure some of your fans that are Tolkien fans would love to know who some of these characters are.
Yes, please, go for it.
Well, because we've got a limited amount of time, and of course everybody knows the hobbits, and we just like to point out that hobbits are habits. Okay, as Ali did a word search, I think probably the only time we used the computer maybe to do something like that, used a word search, and lo and behold, the word habit was used 9 times in the whole mythology of the Lord of the Rings, and 8 times in one chapter, and that chapter is a prologue concerning hobbits. So the four hobbits that we all know and love, Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry, are the cardinal virtues. They are temperance is Frodo. That's why he's the only one that can carry the ring. Sam is fortitude, and they are the interior of the cardinal virtues, and the exterior cardinal virtues are Pippin is prudence and justice is Merry. And that's why Pippin and Justice are actually outside. They're not in the Shire. Their realms are Tewkville and Buckland. So Tolkien is very clever like that. And then, of course, Aquinas calls cardinal virtues, he calls them appetitive, because they moderate our appetites. So Tolkien gives the hobbits wonderful, great, voracious appetites. And there's a lot of little things like that are just really, really fascinating. So I'd like to first get the big mystery out that's been a mystery since the publication of the books in 1954, the identities of Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, which nobody's ever had. Nobody's ever figured out who they are. They've come even to the point of saying, well, they weren't supposed to meet anything. Tolkien just threw them in there to kind of mix it up with chaos, and nothing could be further from the truth. And that's an insult to Tolkien. Tom Bombadil and Goldberry are the transmigrated fallen spirits of the trees of light from the Silmarillion. Tom is Telperion, the silver tree, and Goldberry is Laurelin, the golden tree. And they represent in the whole mythology the free will and the rational intellect. This is all a scholastic mythology. So that's why Tom can do anything he wants. He can even make the ring disappear. He's the free will. But he can't just make it disappear and stop looking at and using the ring. And I'd like to say, ring is binary code. It's the language of the machine. It's ones and zeros, and it's digital. It goes on the finger. Okay, and when you put it on, you enter the virtual realm. You enter the virtual reality, and the Black Riders are the agents of virtual reality. So Tom is hooked. He's become Arda, this human person that represents all of Christendom that Tolkien creates as another world. Is actually become partly, at least, transhuman at the point of the destruction of the ring. The Tower of Barad-dûr is the microchip. Sauron is artificial intelligence. And at this stage, late stage in the development of Arda, he's made up his mind that he's going to change his evil ways, and he's going to come back and cultivate his humanity. And how does he do that? He calls the cardinal virtues out of the Shire, and he cultivates them, feeds them, instructs them, and then sends them on their way with the Fellowship, which are some of the facets of the rational soul, to go and destroy the ring. And that's what they do. So Tom Bombadil is the rational will. Goldberry is the rational intellect, the conscience as well. So we get this saga of the Fellowship. Gandalf is philosophical wisdom. The wizards are the 5 intellectual virtues according to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. So Gandalf is philosophical wisdom, who's been cast out kind of and thrown aside and pushed out by practical wisdom, which is Saruman. And Saruman has practical wisdom, and he's taken over academia. And at Isengard, and Isengard is the blackened ivory tower, the halls of Moria are the halls of science, the halls of academia. Radagast is rational intuition, and then the blue wizards that go outside in the cosmogonical realm, outside the psychology, because this is all a psychological mythology. They are the blue wizards, and they're art and science, and they don't play much of a role, if anything, in the mythology, because they're out here. And the whole mythology is in the interior. Middle Earth is the material brain. That's what it is. It's laid out according to the old Victorian pseudoscience called phrenology, where they claim to know where all the areas of the brain represented all these things. So that's the map that Tolkien started with. And the whole mythology is about getting rid of the microchip, undoing the transhuman portion that's been contaminated. Art has been contaminated with artificial intelligence and the microchip. So he changes his evil ways, and he cleans up his act, and he does away with Shelob, which is pornography, by the way. And undoes the nature of the chip in the cerebellum, which is the realm of Mordor, which according to phrenology is the area of all hate and fear and crime and murder. And so they do away with the microchip, and on their way to returning to their proper place as saints. And they cultivate virtue and return to the Catholic faith and ultimately become saints. And Arda becomes a saint. And that's the only way we're going to be able to fight back against artificial intelligence and this digital beast that's coming upon us that they're orchestrating right now to enslave humanity. The only way we're going to be able to fight back is to cultivate virtue, come back to the true faith, which is the white tree, that is the TLM. The
Faith
white
and reason, yeah.
is the TLM. Yep. Come back, cultivate virtue, get right with Christ, and clean up our act and cultivate our humanity.
You talked about the separation of faith and reason as the elves and the men, which I thought was also amazing.
Yep, and that's one of the reasons that it's such a response from Leo XIII's Aeterni Patris, which is the whole theme of that is the the return of faith and reason come back together, which was divided and divorced during the Enlightenment, particularly by Pierre Bayle, French, very powerful French skeptic. So the whole thing is about bringing about the return of faith and reason. Men are reason, all the different levels of reason, from high, eternal, high reason, which contemplates the eternal. Aragorn is the last of those. To common sense, people might call it, which is practical reason, which is the Rohirrim, and all the way down to vital instinct, which are the wild men. And then elves are faith. And so we've got the last daughter of faith is Arwen, Elrond's daughter. And when they come back together, that's the rejoining of faith and reason, which is bringing them back into their state of Beren and Luthien in the first stage. People need to be familiar with the whole mythology, not just the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, and God forbid, not anything to do with the movies or with Rings of Power by Amazon. That's a dumpster fire. But
I loved when I read the books, I could not imagine the elves tree. Like, I don't have a very good visual imagination. I'm a word person. So I could not for the life of me picture anything that was big and grand that you could go up and live in and move around in.
You mean Galadriel's city? Yeah.
So I loved the films for that scene alone.
Yeah. The films were, Lee and I point that out in the book too. We give credit to the actual magnificent job that they did with the first three movies, not so much the Hobbit movies, but the first three movies, they got the score really well. They got the feel, they got the flavor. They did a wonderful job. The acting was really, really second to none. It was a wonderful production, except for it was basically a heresy because it changed a lot of things. And of course, they took out Tom Bombadil and Goldberry because they had no idea who they were. They didn't understand that the whole mythology is about their fate, their destiny. Just as Tolkien said in the Ainulindale, which is the first chapter of the Silmarillion, the fate of the trees are what the whole age is all about. Of course, the trees died very early, but their spirits carried on in the fallen bodies of Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, who are confined to Middle Earth because Arda is now in a state of mortal sin.
It was interesting when you talked about the differences between the films, which of course everyone loved, and the books, which obviously much fewer people. The hope is that the films led people then to go back to the book. That's always the hope. But I was reminded, I don't know if you've read The Godfather, but the book of The Godfather and the film were just radically different. Mario Puzo hated the film. The book was really about Catholicism and the faith of the women. And out of that they pulled, just the men's story, and the Catholicism was gone. And he hated the movie. and was very sorry he had given them rights to the movie because it lost. I always say to people, go back to the book, because the book is amazing about faith and loyalty and the nuances of it and what does that mean, and none of that was really in the movie. So those deeper things usually get lost in translation, I think.
Well, they definitely do. And like Tolkien said, he didn't. It's a colonization of the mind that we also point out in the book. once you've seen the movies, it's hard to get another image of your own image, even though you've had your own image maybe for most of your life when you read the books maybe 40 years ago. It's hard not to have that image, the original image of, say, Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry, Gandalf, etc., Aragorn. It's hard to not have them replaced with the image now that we've seen with our eyes foisted upon us that winds up cultivating or colonizing our imagination. So that's one of the reasons.
It's always a tough thing. I always try to read the book before I see the movie, when it comes out. You talk about the hobbits are images of virtue, especially the four main cardinal virtues. And it's really virtue that helps that our cooperation with grace and moving towards virtue that really helps us fight against our fallen human nature.
Oh, absolutely. Perhaps Ali would like to jump in here and add something here. I have a tendency to get a little bit over chatty, and I want to make sure Ali gets his opportunity. Do you want to make a comment on that, Ali?
Sure, I'd love to. So in my last tour in the Navy, we taught leadership and ethics to midshipmen, and we went at it through the context of the virtues and establishing the right habits so that when you're put into a position to make a decision, or if it's if you're in combat and you have to make a very hard call, you're habituated to operating in a moral way, in a way that is in accordance with natural law and our faith, and so doing the right thing, even in the small instances, and doing it consistently prepares one for doing it in those big instances and those big moments where it seems like a real dilemma, or would be to someone who hadn't honed their conscience or honed their virtues and their habits, but for someone who's practiced in that, that is. It's much easier. It's much clearer for them to be able to make the right call. And for me, that was my attraction to the Catholic faith. And Paul, he introduced me to the greats, to Aristotle and the Socratic dialogues and Plato. And it's one of the things that was hit over and over again that I was shocked by in the Socratic dialogues was the virtue, and what is it, and how do we practice it? How do we live the virtues? And so for the first time, I understood how I had to live my life through virtue, and so I love that the hobbits were that's the means by which we overcome sin. Right, that's the way in which we overcome the tendencies from original sin that we have, and achieve freedom and joy and happiness. So, Paul, I'll hand it back over to you if you want.
Well, one of the things I'd like to say along the same lines is I remember when Ali and I first got serious about our conversations together. I remember passing on to him and communicating to him that with the habits, human beings are the only creature that we can actually treat ourselves as a work of art. We can actually look at ourselves as a block of stone, quote unquote, and see within the block of stone the perfect image that we want to be. And with habits become our hammer and our chisel, or sometimes maybe even our grinder and our chainsaw, as it were, to actually carve away the things that we don't want, the things that are actually hold us down and prevent that true image from coming through. And Ali received that notion of carving himself, I think, very well. And that's when I remember he made the decision that he didn't want to be, a brain surgeon anymore. He didn't want to be cutting people's heads open, in 10 years. And I said, well, what do you want to do? Think about, really what you want to do. And it's funny that I think the movie Top Gun was still pretty popular back then at the time when it had come out. And Ali decided that he wanted to be a fighter pilot. And he said that, I remember him saying distinctly that he said his goal, he wanted to be the president of the United States, and he wanted to be the first man to walk on Mars. And when he said that, I didn't even flinch. I didn't doubt it for a minute. I knew for a fact that if that was the goal that Ali picked, then I'd put money on the fact that the first footprint on Mars would be Ali's. and there would be no doubt in my mind that he would be the president if that's what he wanted to do, and if that was the will of God. So Ali took to the concept of habits as tools to actually shape and cultivate his own future, his own present, future, and help shape and cultivate and bring about that cultivation to the world around him. He took it very seriously, and I was very proud to be a part of that. So when I needed help, and I desperately needed help, because these concepts are, you got to understand, we had to cut the book, I don't know, in half to get it published, because there was so much that there was so many other things.
Book here.
575 pages, but no publisher was gonna publish it at 1,200 some odd pages. We had to cut it in half. So it was overwhelming to me to try to put all these ideas in any coherent fashion where it would be manageable as a book. And I desperately needed Ali's help with that. And by God's grace, Ali put us together as, I think, a really effective and efficient team to come together. Yeah, we had become so close, and we had become so fluent in our capacity to communicate with each other, particularly through Ali's conversion process, which was really fascinating. And we've got the emails, and one of these days maybe we'll publish it. But so God put us together to get this done, and I just like to say that as far as habits go, Ali really took them seriously, and I think that really changed his outlook of the world. That, hey, I can actually take control, and I can actually have a real hand in my own destiny, and a real hand in the type of person that I really want to be. And we see what he's done.
So we're living in this culture of extreme moral relativism, where people's what they do is sort of decided by desire and consent. I mean, those are our big things. We've got a Supreme Court justice telling us the nature of freedom is to create your own reality, your own universe. So where does one start with the rejection of moral relativism? I think a lot of our young people a lot of people in general, especially though young people, are unaware of the fact that they're living in a world of moral relativism. But it's funny, but I always say by the time you're like 3 or 4 years old, you'll hear little children say, if you give one cookie and the other one 2 cookies, they immediately will say that's not fair. So they have a very concrete understanding of objective moral justice and truth at a very
I would like to jump in just real quick, because I want to make sure that I get this out, and then Ali can finish it off too. I think if you to understand anything, it's always been my inclination, my gut feeling, that you really have to understand where it came from. Okay, and I think that one of the heavy hitters, if not the father of moral relativism, in my research, really it was Martin Luther. Martin Luther, with his sola scriptura, which scripture is where we get our Christian values, our Christian morals, and our ethics. And that coupled with individual interpretation, if that's not moral relativism, I don't know what is. So that's where it all really started. And people have to realize that Christ didn't suffer and die on the cross. God himself become the incarnation and suffer and die on the cross to allow us to just do whatever we want and pick our own path to him, and then demand that he be there at the end of whatever path we decide we want to take. The path is the narrow way. It is the Catholic truth. It's the true Catholic truth. And moral relativism is a great distractor and a confusing agent that we really have to do away with. And I think that there's a reason that we have, as we point out, over 60,000 Protestant denominations, because it's all a product of moral relativism.
Yeah. That's one of the things that brought my husband and I into the church in 1985 was, that there was authority. There was somebody who made, if there was confusion, it was like, well, there was a final authority. You had Peter, and where Peter is. So that was one of the reasons we sort of fled another ecclesial community.
I think you're speaking Ali's language. That was very, Ali can really speak to that. Go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, I was a moral relativist at one point in time. I'd bought it And one of the things that was really interesting that occurred in the process of my conversion, Paul gave me an assignment to write about, to basically to argue the case, whatever side that was, for me, of abortion. So what is abortion? And I wrote him this completely nonsensical argument, defending abortion as a woman's right to choose to what to do with her body. And then he said, "Okay, well, this is a start. Why don't you go back and define your terms?" Right? And so that was really smart of Paul to do, and it's part of his formation. But the idea that truth exists is rooted even in our own language, right? It's part of who we are, and we ignore it today, and we cast it aside. But it's rooted there in the reality, because our words are a capturing of the reality of the situation. It's a communication of reality from one to the other. So when I had to then define what an abortion was, and I had to define what life was, then everything snapped into complete clarity for me, where I just said, I can't be pro-choice anymore, right? Because the choice it's very clear. The choice to murder a human being, right? That is not a choice, that is a crime. And so with that, I think that's the antidote to moral relativism, is this rootedness in our language. And I think that's one of the tools of those who don't want this, is to blur the definitions of the words that we use, or to replace words with euphemisms or other terms to make it harder for us to get at what it is that we're actually talking about. So people, if they don't go the extra mile to define terms, to seek to understand exactly the rootedness of these things, then they can easily be convinced to do something other than what's in accordance with the truth.
I've always been fascinated since Peter Kreeft, I think it was Peter Kreeft, that first pointed out that the words of the abortion industry, the whole feminist movement of abortion, has always been, "This is my body," and that echoes the words of the Eucharist.
Yes, that's very interesting.
So it's just the antithesis of the most holy thing that the priest says, the most holy part of the church: "This is my body given for you," and that they've taken those most holy words of the consecration and twisted them into about the ugliest act, I think, that exists on the earth. Abortion is about, I don't think there's anything uglier or more despicable than the act of abortion, and they've taken those exact words and used them. And it's the audacity of evil always fascinates me.
The devil's nothing if not exceedingly clever.
Yeah. Well, the children of darkness are cleverer than the children of light.
Yeah.
How do we, you talk about casting off the ring of power. So we've got this, we've got AI now, we've got the machinery of technology. We've seen how social media can certainly be used for good, but can also be used terribly for evil. We've got this machinery around us in this 2025 world. Australia's just asked anybody under 16 to get rid of their smartphones, because they're realizing that, especially for our young people, it really is a source of evil. But we also know for adults, the pornography that comes through, all kinds of addictions. Our exorcist here in Rhode Island, Father Paul Damaris, says that the three portals to hell are addiction, abortion, and abuse. And we see all of these interconnected with the machines of our time. How do young people cast off this ring of power? Because it's some kind of a conscious.
Well, we have to return to the cultivation of our humanity and understand that, first off, I think for young people to do it, I think there has to be an admission and humility to make to acknowledge the fact that young people are not capable of wisdom. They're very, very little, unless there's some that's been infused by God, by the grace of God. Wisdom is just something that you have to work at, and to be a human being to be a competent human being requires effort, and we have to make an effort, and we can't continually outsource even the little things that we do, like getting from point A to point B. If we rely on our phones to do that all the time, we never really even understand how to get to where we want to get to. And that might not seem like a big deal, but the reality is it's one more competent aspect of the human being that we've outsourced to the machine. And every convenience and every ease and every efficiency that we allow the machine to enter into our lives in the name of efficiency, in the name of profit, in the name of convenience or pleasure, is one more thing that we outsource, that little piece of our own human competency. And we have to be willing to try. We have to be willing to make the effort, and the joy, part of the wonderful joy of being a human being is making the effort. Nothing, the old saying that nothing worth having or owning is not worth working for. We have to work for those things. And being a competent human being means that we have to be willing to work at it. And that phone, the technology and whatnot, that's constantly telling us, look how easy this is. Look how I can make your life so much easier. And then they say, oh, and this frees up your time so you can be more creative. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, because I don't see any more creation going on around here. I really don't. I think that creativity in the human realm is at probably an all-time low. And that's because we've outsourced so much. Part of it is because we've outsourced so much to the machine. The other reason is because of the terrible injury that's been done to our education system, particularly through Saruman. Saruman is in the image of John Dewey, the who really ruined the Western education system. And I think that we have to take advantage. We have to take responsibility for our own education. We have to take responsibility for our health, clean up our act, eat properly, exercise. Don't get involved with big food, big ag, and then big pharma by what you're eating and then become unhealthy. We have to take charge of what we bring in through our eyes. We really do. And those are the eagles. The good things that we bring in through our eyes in Tolkien's mythology are the eagles. And the terrible things that we bring in through our eyes in the first and second age were the dragons, the spirits of defilement. And then later on, the virtual reality. And those are the terrible things that we take in through our eyes. So, as far as getting away from the machine is grow some of your own food. Read. We need to read. Read more. Read good things. Develop your intellectual endurance. Develop your imagination. You're not going to develop your imagination by watching TikTok videos.
Right. It's always fascinated me how passive watching, say, a film is. Or I can watch a show in the evening, and if you ask me, usually what the plot was the next day, I have no idea. But if I read a book, like I said, I read Lord of the Rings 40 years ago, and I still remember the story. So it really stays with us. And I really became very aware of the difference when I had COVID, because for 2 weeks, I couldn't read anything. I could not read anything. But I could watch television, just like laying half dead on the couch. I couldn't move. But I mean, I didn't get extremely sick, just immobile basically for 2 weeks. But it fascinated me that I couldn't read a paragraph, but I could watch TV. And just be entertained. And so that really made me aware of how active the action of reading is. How much of it, your energy and your brain it takes up, and your mind, just like, all of it going on, and just how extremely passive, looking at your phone or watching a show is. Yeah.
Well, that's why Aristotle points out very clearly the difference, and the scholastics point out very clearly the difference between the active intellect and the passive intellect. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we can, if we just sit there and allow ourselves to just bring in whatever without any intellectual effort whatsoever, doesn't take any, it's actually shaping us, and it's numbing us and making us less and less intelligent and less competent. And that's by design, and I think it's intentional. But when we read, we have to engage our active intellect and fully engage our imagination. And our imagination, and what the scholastics called, Aquinas particularly called, the phantasms. The phantasms of our imagination are so critical to our thought process. And media, visual audio media, does away with that. There's no need for the phantasms anymore. The phantasms are provided from the exterior, and that's outsourcing our imagination, and it ultimately kills our imagination.
One of the things I've found recently on social media that I've been really pleased about is there's some people out there putting out little stories. And they might be 3, 4, 10 paragraphs long, but they're stories and you have to read them. They'll have one picture associated with them, one photograph, but it's a story about someone's life or some heroic thing that was done. And I think that's just been really wonderful. And I've just noticed that just in the last month or two, sort of encouraging young people to read things on social media because that's where they are.
I think this goes back to, Paul touched on this a couple times, but the importance of education and formation of the next generation. I think we need to provide children who don't know better something to replace or to compete with the screens and the social media and all of this virtual life that with all the lies it promises. And so for us in the classical education movement and really the renewal of the Catholic education movement is to bring back a rich human formation. And education, as it ought to be, is the passing on the very best things of culture from one generation to the next, right? And to give them all these rich things, to read these amazing books, the books that have inspired so many. Tolkien's works are among those, right? Where just people can activate their imagination. They can see what truth is, goodness and beauty, and be inspired by these things and to recognize the best, the most beautiful, to see what right and truth look like. So then when they go back and they see, it's like going to Paris and then going to Las Vegas and seeing just all the lights and just the artificialness of it all. It doesn't hold the same sway. Whereas if you haven't been to those other places and then you go to Las Vegas, it can be perhaps intoxicating to kind of see it and to be easy to be impressed by it. But when you've seen the real thing, you understand what true beauty is. The goodness of the world, and you see something of substance, and you've been formed in it, and your appetites have been formed in that. When you then go back and you see social media or just half-baked ideas or arguments or things, you can see right through it and say, that's not right. You're not persuaded by it as much. And so I think having a strong formation for me, and I think for the church for the last 2 millennia, that's a classical education model, which we've gotten away from, unfortunately, for the last 150 years, but we're going back in that direction. And it's really exciting to see.
Wonderful. As you mentioned Las Vegas, my husband and I have never been there, but we drove by it once on our way from California to the Grand Canyon. And we just remember on the highway seeing a billboard that said, 7 deadly sins, 1 convenient location.
Yeah, it's awful.
Well, I think we'll just keep on going to the Grand Canyon.
That sounds like hell.
My son went there one time and he called me and he said, "Dad, I'm not advocating nuclear destruction, but if there was one place that needed a nuclear bomb, it's Las Vegas." I'd like to say that to continue along that line, I'd like to offer your listeners something that I think young people and everybody really needs to understand, that being a competent human being is a real joy. It is a real joy to be well read, to have a depth of your comprehension, and to be truly competent as a human being. You're interesting. You're an interesting person. You can talk about almost anything on a deep level, and it's just the joy of that, of being a competent human being, is so rich and rewarding compared to just being an empty, hollow shell of a person who's outsourced their imagination, who's outsourced their virtue. They're lost in moral relativism, and they're empty inside. And that emptiness breeds a festering depression and a festering want for relief. And ultimately, it's going to lead a lot of people, unfortunately, into the alternative virtual realm, and they're going to be convinced that the answer for them is going to become transhuman and join with the machine. And ultimately what that will actually mean is that they're going to be killed. They'll be, you can't put your soul in a machine and think it's in a machine and then still have it in your body. And the separation of the soul and the body is the very definition of death. So this is part of a very clever genocide by the masters, the machine masters, who are rapidly pushing all of humanity into the hell of the virtual realm, and under the surveillance of the surveillance state, self-driving cars, artificial intelligence. Don't use artificial intelligence. If you want to know something, look it up. I mean, you might look it up on the computer, but don't have Grok or whatever explain it to you. Look it up and read it, for yourself, and actually do your own investigation. And that's the better part, I believe, of education, is actually looking these things up and reading them and understanding them from a comprehending perspective, rather than just information. This whole idea of the information age now joining with the machine age has got us into a lot of trouble. And of course, it's mixed with a heavy dose of Darwinism. So people are convinced that, we were once monkeys and now we're men, and now men will become machines. And this is all planned. This is all a very intentional, demonic road path to lead humanity into the alternative realm, doing away with God's realm, and creating a competitor to God's natural creation. And once you enter the virtual reality, you've left God.
I want to mention, you talk, just because I know we don't have much time left. You talk about, we all love superheroes. We love our superhero movies.
Yeah.
But the Hobbitses, Frodo, they're really sort of ordinary heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about the importance of being ordinary heroes, and that how we're called to live lives of heroic holiness.
We are, and the real heroes, the real superheroes, I believe, that I wrote in the book are the saints. And that's the heroic virtue. That's the hero that we really need to become. And I'd also like to point out one other character too that people need to understand, and that's Gollum. And Gollum is intemperance, and that's why he calls Frodo master, because only temperance can master intemperance. And also, Gollum also sees in Frodo the true master of the whole mythology, which is the free will, which is Tom Bombadil. So we understand when we're reading the book, at certain times we can hear like somebody else. Tolkien says that Frodo felt like someone else was using his voice, and that was Tom Bombadil. So Gollum can actually see in Frodo the free will and the master, as Goldberry calls Tom Bombadil master. He's the master. And so we have to do away. This inner Gollum intemperance is destroying billions of souls. And that's our total lack of ability to master our desire for pleasure, particularly sexual pleasure. And I just like
I want to mention here, we're really not capable without grace of doing
No, but we have to make the conscious effort, and we have to ask for the grace. Right. And we have to really try. I mean, God is going to be there for us with the grace when we're trying. If we're not willing to make an effort, we have no right to expect grace, any more than we have a right to expect, $1 billion to fall on us out of heaven. You've got to work at it. That's a bad comparison, but if we have time, I'd also like to tackle the question of allegory real quick, and I'd like to make sure that people understand that Tolkien told us what the mythology was about. It's about the fall of Adam and Eve, about mortality, specifically the fear of death, and the machine. And what our book does is shows exactly where all those things are. And unfortunately, people don't understand the nature, particularly of typology, of parable, of fable, of these other forms of communication that have representative, or as Tolkien says, it's applicable. All they know, because our education has fallen so far, all they know is any comparison with something else must be allegory. And that's just not the case. So Tolkien said he cordially disliked allegory, but it didn't say he disliked typology, fable, simile, metaphor, parable, all these other things, the forms of communication. So I just like to get that out there and square that argument away.
Kiki, one thing I'd love to add, if it's okay, is I was a skeptic through a good chunk of this, where I was like, Paul, where are you getting this from? I don't understand it, and going through it one thing after another, and trying to explain it from him. But there was a moment that occurred where we were going through. I think it was the angelic beings, and lining them up, the inner meaning, and it all clicked into place. And it was really. It was enough of those small little, things that lined up perfectly with the interpretation. It was just the tipping point hit for me, where it said, "Oh my gosh, this is actually right. This is actually true." And Paul's like, "That's what I've been telling you for the last 3 years." And I said, "Well, I just was going along because I'm your friend, but I actually believe it now." And so someone coming in and saying, "How do you get all of this? How did you? This is so far from anything I've heard or read." Well, it's a mountain of evidence, one very small rock at a time, and they all align beautifully in the same direction. And then when you go back into the history and understand Tolkien's life, he was raised by a priest. He was soaked in scholasticism by a priest who had been formed by St. John Henry Newman, and he grew up in Newman's next to Newman's grave, and in the shadow of St. John Henry Newman, and in this scholastic. It was the air he breathed, and it just makes it all lock into place and bring clarity to this was the perspective he was coming from, and the idea that he was a philologist. So every word was deliberately chosen. It was not, there's nothing accidental or half-hearted. He wrote and rewrote and agonized over every word. So everything has a depth of meaning to it, so it's not we're tying these things here. No, Tolkien was very intentional about it. And so it's worth diving in and discovering these things one little rock at a time.
I just want to ask you quickly, because I just read something just recently about the orcs, that the orcs are problematic. You haven't mentioned them as the.
Well, I'd love to take that. Orcs are vice, and we have to understand habits are ramified. They're dug in. That's why hobbits live in holes. They're dug in, and Middle Earth and the ground is the flesh. It's the material brain, okay, laid out in that frenetic map. Okay, the hobbits are dug in. Orcs are dug in too. They're not bad habits. They're vice. Bad habits live in the Shire. For instance, the Sackville Bagginses are the bad habit of theft. Okay, but they're cured in the end, as we point out. So orcs are very clever, and it's as they grow. So in the Hobbit, for instance, you have goblins, and they're a lot less brutal and big and strong as orcs. And orcs are a more mature, maybe we'll say, sin in your adolescence. Okay, and then you've got Uruk-hai, and Uruk-hai are really, really interesting because Tolkien names them after the first human city in Mesopotamia, Uruk, and he names them, and what they are is they're shameless, and that's why they're no longer afraid of the light of the sun. The light of the sun is the fallen spirit of Laurelin, the golden tree, who's the conscience. So Gollum is
Oxford Rugby Club.
Gollum is afraid of the sun too, because his conscience, it burns a conscience, and the same with orcs. But Uruk-hai are no longer. They're proud of their sin. They're actually coming right out and marching against humanity, marching against the West. And this is really a clever. This is the way Tolkien uses images. Yeah,
Yeah. Amazing. Well, there's so much in your book. It's wonderful. I'm looking forward to reading the complete thing. I haven't read all of it, but I've read quite a bit of it. And where can people?
If I could add one more thing real quick, I'd like people to read the book to understand. I speculate on Adam and Eve and the origins and the two stories of creation in the book of Genesis to actually highlight the nature of original sin, which is Melkor. Melkor in the mythology is original sin. He's not Satan. Okay, he's original sin. So I would like to just make it very clear that my speculation has nothing to do with polygenism. I've studied Pius XII's Humani Generis, and I've talked to several very capable theologians, and my speculation there has nothing to do with polygenism, and it's not heresy. Thank you.
Ali, I just want to ask you, because you're working with education and young people, classical education, I'd just like you to throw in, what is the connection in your mind to the sacraments? Because, I mean, that's where we're getting grace. I mean, obviously grace comes in many ways. God's not in a box, but did give us these boxes of the Eucharist and confession.
Yes, I think education properly is formation for heaven. And so everything that we are being formed at in our education ought to be preparing for us and integrated with the sacraments. And so, for example, at Divine Mercy Academy in Pasadena, we attend Mass every day. We have confession once a month offered to the students. The children go to adoration regularly, and we help them form them. We don't do the official formation. The Archdiocese does that, but we prepare them for their sacraments of First Communion and Confirmation. And so these children, when they go into their formation that's done, they are so well formed that it's not, they're well formed enough so that they understand completely what's going on, but they're the exemplars for the students who haven't had the benefit of this formation, right? They're the ones that are bringing those children along, so they understand the substance of it. So absolutely, it all needs to be integrated, where you've got the intellectual formation and the spiritual formation all unified toward the end, which is heaven.
Well, I'm being called off to another interview. Where can people get your book?
Well, they can get it on anybody that sells books. Amazon. It's got a 4.8 or 4.9 rating on Amazon right now. You can also go to our website, readmountdoom.com, and I'll actually sign a book and put it in the mail. But don't do that until at least probably a month after Christmas, because I can't even get books right now because the printer's backed up. But to go back to, I'd like to just make it very clear that the nature of education, the real form of education, prepares us for the city of God and makes us citizens of the city of God, to hearken back to Augustine. The modern education system that we see now as public and even parochial schools points you directly into the earthly city.
Okay. This is beautiful. I really thank you both. It's been delightful.
Thank you for having us.